Ik ea yoxatini shtakat Johan. Ukhkanihin yudo sago at washtakat at Gashi sai a atina khayati. Ukhkanihin, ukhkakanhini. Chudechia, gasoline, diesel, kerosene, gwashkiwe. Ya hahiti yik jeg ginki ko asiat. Ajawewe hahit yik ausatachi at kash ilchin ya yidat we hin tu nach at the age da age ne hahit yik aya ye hasjinne. Ya yidat khoach tuasuko shukwa da diuchtatani. Táax'aa shkalniki. Táax'aa. Waltsuka gachtu aq yata. Táax'aa. Yata kudzatitsu. Yuachshike kwati. Yadu Gwash achtuasuku. Aka dark yi sauchlahayi. Kliatke gwash tia sendich ag. Katkatsewak gwatginsa. Gwatkasa. We Táax'aa aya watu ujin. We dekoa. Akakedi yes. Akakedi Ḳ'oo yes. Yatekoa Aas Yádi Ḳu.oo yes. Ayanach yatia. Qoneaya yakuhi. Chakhataya akawuchin yukakhtila. Yada gutil yudu asagu gutil. Qusakha kwan so yudu asagu. Qusakha kwan. Kak an ayeti yata ishke hitig. Quts. Gwail. Tikhisani. Ketlt. Táax'aa. Yat'ig. Wut'ig. Kekqwat'ig. Atsun. Awatsun. Akqwatsun. Yanakut. Wugud. Gukakut. Yek yanakut. Yek uwakut. Yek gukakut. Yek uwakut. Kesh yek wugud. Aqaqhushi. Aqaqhuwashi. Aqaqhuqwashi. Ausatin. Ye aguxsatin. Ya anasquain. Ausaku. Aguxsaku. Ascha. Ascha. Aussacha. Aussacha. Agursacha. Agursacha. Ashachisht. Ashachisht. Ashawachich. Ashawachich. Ashaqquachich. Ashaqquachich. Yenaskit. Yenaskit. Woodzagid. Woodzagid. Yekquaskid. Yekquaskid. Ach ya anastain. Ach ya anastain. Ach ausata. Ach ausata. Ach agursata. Ach agursata. Ya anayan. Ya anayan. Awaya. Awaya. Ke akquaya. Ke akquaya. Sha'a. Sha'a. Ya analkats. Ya analkats. Aushakoots. Aushakoots. Agurshakoots. Agurshakoots. Akatwujachin. Akatwujachin. Akadekakquashchin. Akadekakquashchin. Awashat. Awashat. Ke akquashat. Ke akquashat. Shoot at the ark. Shoot at the ark. Shoot out the uck. Shoot out the uck. Shoot the agur the ark. Shoot the agur the ark. Akadeya anachut. Akadeya anachut. Akat our hut. Akat our hut. Akade akquahut. Akade akquahut. Ashuch. Ashuch. Aushauch. Aushauch. Ke agurshauch. Ke agurshauch. Astacht. Astacht. Ausatach. Ausatach. Ke agursatach. Ke agursatach. Ja, jeder das Achetza ach Tashuchetanek. Idakaya akeha wutich. Kachaya wutich hakusti ach. Watich isayucha awuch ischa antkini. Kusachakwan kutziti wegao. Kleinach ka awatun. Kashik wugud. Du kik du iqaq huwashi. Klehu ayatsu kashik wugud. Shik ugud aya. Ya kiki a. Chayanaskach aya. Du hunchu haskaya kunashin. Aya dark. Ya shaq aya. Ausatin ka aya. Chitle ayu ausakur kusachakwan khsati. Ashkhandi yanagut. Ash shawachich awa Qusacha quanch awe shawach itch with the geed. A dach aus a ta we ye duck clay gwash 2 day. Clay awa ya do hiti atla a ye day. We ye duck awe we yana 2. Awe a ku awe a 2 dach ke wugudi. Ashkoots ye tikhisani. A 2 dach ke good awe do cheat with jachin we qusacha quan qusi. Aya yich ke uwahan ga nach a. Chitlek ga nach a. Yuchya yanas 18 awa a shower hitch. Shoot at the ark, kle a cut our hut. Was geht's gechsene we kusacha quan ketlike. Aya chatl a dayan kach to de shetchi awa ausha we kusacha quan ketli awa ausha Kayaaní ne awe Táax'aa husati. A jawe Táax'aa qukas tucht. Ye awe wuti. Ye ayayandi shakquatan. Ya ida tachtua sagu. Kayaaní kinach gach kegachtu. No, Kayaaní kinagachtu tu. Nach say shedzi. Equati. Aqad late kach inach. Achtua sagu. Akagachtu nig. Must be diesel in my brain. We're going to read out loud, okay? Read out loud, and then we'll work on translating it. So this one, a little bit bigger, a few more words, and then some. What you'll notice is if you compare this one, and I'll upload the slides for both of them. I think the other one's already up there. We did this, I think, last week. We did the smaller version. So the smaller version, I think, was 30 lines. This one might be 50, I can't remember. But also with the other one, some of the things got cut down and sort of, if it was a metaphor, it got switched to a more straightforward way to say it. And so this one, it retains more of the original text from Robert Zuboff. And for anyone who's a Kayaaní, we're not changing the story. We're just creating a smaller version of it so we can lead people up to the bigger one. In case people are mad that I'm changing his story, like I'm not. But there are certain things in his story that I'd probably skip, just from a personal perspective. He liked to compare things to, just like Jesus. Jesus always came in the stories all the time, and if that's your thing, that's cool. But for me, I don't think we really need those comparisons. But there is a pretty cool thing, and so his Tlingit is out of this world, crazy good. But he had these really interesting things when he spoke English, Robert Zuboff. Like he'd say octopus, and he'd say the Pacific Ocean. And I don't make fun of him when I talk about these things because I just think it's really neat because it's a characteristic of him. And one of the things is I think he's for devil, he said Devon. So he's like, that raven's a real Devon. But he did a lot of good for us, And so there's complexities with some of these stories. But I'm not changing them. We're just sort of cutting it down to a bite-sized version and then taking a version that's a little bit bigger. Okay, who wants to read the first line? Sheesh. And how are we going to translate that? And that as we translate, just do what you can, and if we need to look anything up or talk about it, we can. Ask any questions you've got about things that are going on in there too.
Before you say that,
Yeah, we read it. We're just doing the translation already. Yeah. Anybody?
Over there over in the interior, it's like life. I know boutique is hard, so over in the interior it was hard.
Yes. And one thing that Tlingit likes to do is, we're going to talk about this for a second, right? Well, I'll put it over here because that'll be a little bigger.
Pause or so.
So Tlingit loves to use like at and and huh, right? And so what Tlingit tends to do, it just has this thing where it's like the language is saying, I told you who it was, I told you where it was. Now we'll switch to them and their and the thing. So it usually doesn't keep naming the thing, right? Like, so if they said Táax'aa, that's what we're talking about, is in the interior. So then when you have is, there's a whole bunch of things you can make from So you can get day, you can get dach, you can get, oh, that's usually low. You can get nach, and then you can get ach, and you can get, well, that's probably enough. So the way that we translate this when it comes up like this is you say, at that place. But then sometimes when we're translating it into English, we'll just say there, right? So if we say at that place, when we say day, we're saying towards it. Adach, away from it. Anach, through it or along it. Ach, located there, residing there. I'll put that under a page of notes. Oh, there's a big reveal coming. We've got a word for cucumber.
I asked about the soaking of the gumboots. too.
Oh, I forgot that one, so I'm glad you did.
So pickling. So breaking
Okay.
later.
We'll get there. First, who's gonna do? Okay, so
Sitting on your computer cord,
I am.
on the other side. Sorry.
It was on that. For a while, it was on both sides. So okay. Sheesh. Okay. What do we got?
Over there in the interior.
So then, like, this is a thing, and then this is a thing. So it's like the X'éig. But then this thing refers back to that other thing.
It was hard.
We don't have that yet. But we do have, you would recognize this a lot more if we went like that. Which is, you probably see it more like this, right? So you say, Yádi, we are there. X'éig, we were there. X'éig, we repeatedly were there. Okay. Who wants to do number 2?
I can do that.
Ah.
Táax'aa Ḳ'éig
Sheesh.
Isn't that just sort of like a repetition of the top one? Our way of life was very hard.
Yeah, but there's no difficult in this first one. It just says we were there. That's all this says. It's like it's like we repeatedly were there. Regularly were there. But then this one, kach is very, wutik is difficult. Or for, yeah, let's just go with difficult. It could be for something to be really solid and hard. And then hakosti, our life, there. So we do have the be repeating. So our life was very difficult there. Or our life there was so hard. However you want to say it.
Can you just, I think I might not be understanding why wutik at the top and wutik are not linked.
So tik, and so this first one is tik, which as a verb root is frozen or rigid. And then the top one, well, let me do it this way. So the top one is T, to be. So those are different verbs, right? So wu, even though we're seeing this T-E-E-X,
Gotcha.
our brain is probably jumping like, oh yeah, yeah. Of course.
Because sometimes letters can be used differently. I understand.
Right, and so, but with this, we do have a series of verbs from this, which is frozen, wudlitik, ice, tieg, just on its own. Like, you could probably make the argument that the verb root is a noun, which means ice, which is wild, right? So then wutik is usually difficult, but then there's a verb like shetik, which means like if you had, let's say I gave you like a bucket with no handle, and it's full of water. I said carry it over there. So then you gotta hold it really tight so it doesn't spill, and so that's called shetik, but it's the same verb root. And so it has to do with like kind of tensing up your muscles. But yeah, Táax'aa wutik, it was difficult. Our life was so hard there. Okay? Put this under our notes. Okay. Who wants to do number 3?
X'éig, which is unclean.
Sheesh. What parts can we translate?
Which is eating each other.
Mm-hmm.
What isayu is that it's so hard or it's difficult to a certain extent.
Yes. And so like thinking about this wasa, it's like how, right? That's how we form how questions. Wasa ieti, wasa atbune, wasa ituasak, right? But then it's also how we make statements, right? We could say wasa ach tuwuyake. And that's not a question, right? That's not saying how do I feel good, right? It's saying how good do I feel? Like it's I guess you could do the same thing in English, right? How wonderful we felt at that time, right? And so you see it used like this, and then you see wa ti ki sayu, so you can put the thing in between it. So how difficult it was. Cha'a is just putting some emphasis on stuff. Like those are just a couple of particles. It's like just really calling attention to back to this difficulty, which is kha and antkini. Do we know that one?
Townspeople.
Yeah, the town people. And it means, it comes from on, T to be at, P to be sitting. We usually get keen. So it's the ones who are sitting at town, right? That's how you build that into a noun. It was so hard, the people ate each other. Let's do number 4.
Kusa Hakwan Kuditi Wegao.
Jeez.
It was that time that the cannibal existed.
Kusa Hakwan Kuditi Wegao.
Yeah, well. So the cannibal existed at that time. And so I think this is how the Downhauer, I think this is how they translate it. But I would probably say in this story, Qusakh Kwan is a single thing. But I don't know, the people are eating each other. So maybe because that happened, something really terrible happened to one of them in particular. I don't know. So I guess Kayaaní could be multiple. Okay. Let's do number 5.
Táax'aa.
Jeez. And what do we got here? We're missing a tone mark. That's what we got.
The first man went hunting. Or the
Not
first
the
we went.
first. That would be 书火咖 or 书骨咖.
Oldest.
What's that?
Oldest?
No, that would be hun-ho-a-we-ka.
One man.
Yes, a single person. So Kleinach, it's the nach is how we count people. Kleinach, dachnach, naskinach, nakuninach, kejininach. And then Kleinach is a really interesting one because it's sort of like alone. And the way that that works in English too, right? Like if you say, I'm all alone. Like a lot of times that's sort of seen as a negative thing, right? I'm alone. And here you could say, they went by themselves. That could also be interpreted that way. So you could say, this could be interpreted as 2 general ways, like one person went hunting, or you could say someone went hunting by themselves. It means the same thing. But if you're just talking on the phone and you say, someone like, Ishan, you say, I'm all alone. Right? But I don't know. I think it was a comedian who said that. He was like, how do we go from a toddler saying, all by myself, to like that sad song where it's like, all by myself. So a similar thing, right? So one person, one man went hunting. And that could mean person too. That doesn't necessarily mean a man. But in this story, it is a man. Okay? So this is number 6.
X'éig.
Sheesh. What do we got here?
They didn't come back.
Yeah, they didn't come back down, and so the infant, again, we talked about this. There, he went to hunt up in the mountains because we know that because that's where the youngest brother eventually goes and sees kind of what happened. And so Yéq uagut could mean to walk down to the beach. That's what it means. But it could also mean to come from a mountain and to come off of the mountain. Okay. Number 7. Táax'aa.
Dukik, Dukiga, Kuwashi.
Sheesh.
Their brother.
Mhm. Younger brother.
What's Ega? Their younger brother there. The do is the there, right?
Yes. And so there's a couple of like, whoops. So what this E is doing, it exists only to put a suffix onto something, right? And so in this case, the suffix is qa, which means usually to go after something or to go and get it. So that's kind of what it means, or to follow something.
So his younger brother went looking for him.
Yes. So you have, we'll write this as n qa, and we'll just put kuwashi so that we're not changing the verb. So this means to go look for n, which is a noun. Keitqa kuwashi, they went to look for a dog. Qatqa kuwashi, they went to look for pilot bread, right? Kateqa kuwashi, they went to look for keys, right? So you can put anything in there. But if you're looking for a person, do iqa kuwashi. So it has to have that d in there. And so if that's the case, so now we figure out how the do iqaq works. Oops. How would I say they were looking for me? What kind of thing is do?
Is them a person?
There, right? So like it's something that we know because we could say do jin, and what is that?
Their hand.
How would I say my hand? So now how would I say they're looking for me? Right? So what you'll start to recognize is, oh, this is a verb that has the object bounced outside of the verb. And in that case, but it's not it's not like you've never seen this before. Achtuwu yake, dutuwu yake, ituwu yake, same type of thing. It's called like an indirect object. It's just like, I think it's like, oh yeah, you think you got those objects figured out? Well, look, we got indirect objects, right? But it just means you change it with ach or do. And this happens. We'll say ach it idishi, right? You've probably said that phrase before. Do it idishi, help them. Ha it idishi, help us, right? So you could change that thing just by recognizing. But what you train your brain to do is just to be like, oh yeah, it's one of those ones that has that indirect object outside that changes with the relational pronoun. His younger brother went to search for him. Naskadushu'a. Dusakapwatu. We still got short ones. Go for it.
Tlehu aya tsu tlech ye hugut.
Chish. And what do we got for a translation?
You also didn't come back down.
Yes. So the tle is then. Hu is just saying the keek also didn't come back down. Oops, that should be like this. Okay. 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 Okay, someone's got a fun one. Kushuk'a.
Yek but aya yakikri aya naskach aya du hunhu haska ya kunashi.
Sheesh. Okay. Okay. Kun naqteqsa. Klaig. Dech. Nusk. Dakun. Right. So you've got 4 different things, and they should go in this order, but just in terms of like what are the things that should be sticking together. And like the ayah, really it just provides a little bit of separation between your thoughts. Ayah and aweh, they're used for that, to like get a little bit of separation. You're getting too many concepts in here, so you throw an ayah or an aweh in there, right? Just allows you to think about it, allows the listener to also to hear that there's like these little chunks. This is a contraction of what? Anybody know? Klesh, klesh, right? And so a lot of times it will go to this in specific instances, and this is probably one where it would like to do that. And if you turned it into a noun, if you were to say like shekogudi, the not coming back, or shishjini is a vest because it means it doesn't have arms. So I want to talk, so you have ugut, right? So the verb has changed. And what you do have here is a fairly advanced verb mode, which it's Robert Zuboff, so you're going to get lots of advanced stuff. And what it ends up doing is it's going to have the conjugation prefix there, and this is a 0 conjugation prefix. So all you see is ugut. But what happened is like it went from wugut to ugut. And what this means is it's saying we call it consecutive. So it's saying right after this thing, this other thing happened, right? And that's the case here. So as far as how you translate that, you would say when he didn't come back or after he didn't come back, either way. After he didn't come back, so this is, now this is the middle brother, right? We got to keep track of this stuff. The oldest one went out, didn't come back. Youngest one went looking for him, didn't come back. So now we get, when he didn't come back, Kayaaní, the youngest one. What is he doing? What is gach? Or, well, sounds like a rabbit like that. So what's gach?
Is that the verb? Oh, it's doubling. Never mind, sorry.
Okay.
Pray or cry.
It would be gach, crying. Yes. So let's go, and let's go check it out. So we're going to go into everybody's favorite verb dictionary, go down the underlined G's, and you could start, I would start at the GW's, because then you can scroll up, and then you're at the GA's. So qach is to cry, and then you probably have this one, to keep crying, but we're going to go look up cry and just see if we could find, because it's always good to just go look at what the examples are. So we'll scroll up to cry. We're looking for this one that says kept crying. The child went home crying. So this one, it works really well here. Because you have some things like qach, wukach is like to cry, and I think of it as sort of crying silently. And then kadaqach is to cry out really loud, like if you're in a lot of pain or fear. And then you have tzikach. And where's the one? Okay, let's leave it at that. So it's this one, to keep crying. And so what we end up with back in our story is when we have ya nasqach, it implies that they're kind of going along crying too. Like there's a few different verbs that work like this. And so we see 2 examples of this. So we're looking at ya and na. So these 2 things combined put the verb into this in the process of happening, like ya nagut, they're walking, ya anasquin, they're getting to know it. And in this case, ya nasqach, they are going along crying. And then we have another example of it right here. So this verb up here, which we have, du'iqaq, right? So we've just encountered that verb, du'iqaq. So if we change this one to ya, this goes back to ku. The classifier is now 0. Let's put these different parts that are here. And now we're going to add na, right? So this is where we see kunna. Whenever we have this ya and na pattern, we encounter a Tlingit rule. And the rule is an open verb root must close. So you cannot have ya na and end with a vowel. So what it does, it says, I see this na right here, and I'll add another one at the end. And that's why you get Yaqunashin. And this also means they're going along looking for them. So there's a bunch of stuff packed into this one sentence. When he didn't come back, which is now the middle brother, right? All this is built into the story. The youngest one, he's going along crying, looking for his older brothers. Duhunchuhasqa is looking for his older brothers. Okay. Okay. Chinkata.
Ayadak Yasha Kak Aya Ausitine Kai Aya.
Jish.
Towards the interior of the mountain.
Yeah.
Side?
Kak is between.
Valley.
Yes. And what's Ausitine?
Looking for?
It's in that realm. So if we go back up here, we had like a little picture of Ausitine.
Father.
To see, right? To see someone, to behold them, to see them. Usually a specific person.
It's not a person.
And then what this is really interesting, right? What we end up with is Ausitine is they saw them, right? But in terms of who sees who, right? Tlingit loves using third person, right? It always uses third person so much. But what we usually do is we say like, well, who are we talking about? Who are we talking about right now? Who's doing the stuff?
The youngest brother.
The youngest brother, right? So that is the one. If we could just go right to a verb that says Ausitine, we would think, okay, the younger brother saw them, whoever it was, right? And they're probably going to tell us that pretty soon. But what we end up with is Ausitini Qa. So we have Qa, which is a person, and we have Ausitine. But when we say Ausitini Qa, this is turning this verb into an adjective. So it's saying it was inland, in the saddle of the mountains, that person that he saw, right? So this just becomes, instead of like he saw a person, it's saying the person that he saw. So you could do this with a whole bunch of things, right? You could say, Chesachan, I love them. Chesachaniqa, the person that I love. And you can say, Cheshakan, I hate him. So Cheshakanicha, the person that I hate, right? And so like this is what it's doing, is it's turning the verb into an adjective. And so once we move from the sort of the shorter version to the longer version, we put the more complicated stuff back into it, just to show you what's going on. Like when you deal with a master storyteller like Shadang, these are the types of things that you get. Okay, I'll tell you. You know, to help you remember Chag, there is someone who has the Tlingit name Chagishabu. And I'm going to tell you where they got this name. So I heard. So K'uch was the name of Johnny Marks, who was my uncle. He was very fun to speak Tlingit with. He liked to laugh all the time. And he knew like a million songs and stories. He was very good with Tlingit. And someone was telling him a story in English. And the story was this girl was cleaning fish down on the dock. So, so like sometimes when you pull in, there's like a table where you can clean your fish. Clean the fish. And was kind of putting everything away. And then went down to rinse their hands in the water. When they went to rinse their hands in the water, they, so you're going down near the ocean, bends down, and is sort of in a squat position and leaning over, and was wearing some maybe low-cut pants. And so there was like a gap in the back of the pants, and then was rinsing her hands. So a raven flies over her. So then it pooped, and as the timing was just perfect, and it went right into her butt crack, right, like into her pants, and she stood up and was like shocked and didn't know what to do and couldn't believe it happened, and then gets in her car and has to drive like with a hand on the seat to hold herself up and like drive home. And so of course everybody's just dying laughing like as she tells the story. And at the end, Johnny Mark says, "I know your Tlingit name now. Aas, the woman in the saddle of the mountains. Because Táax'aa is the name of your butt crack as well." And so the K'ak just means between two things, right? Aas Yádi, between the trees. That's a Tlingit name. And so, as luck would have it, like, so someone told me this story who heard it from Johnny Marks. We're all at a language immersion, and Kaki Shao was there, and we were all laughing, and this person looked at me and said, "Go ask if that's where her name comes from." And I said, "No, 1000% never gonna do it." But then like the next day, she just told me that story, and it was verified. I didn't even ask for it. And so I was like, I succeeded somehow. So that is Kak. May you never forget it. Okay, we should probably take a break. Come back at 10 till. Little cheese for your patience today.
I told everyone.
Akawe. Hatuasaku, tusaku, asat kwane. That's like
Honey.
huh?
Sorry. Could we go back to Aas Yádi for just a minute?
Mm-hmm.
And what I already forget what you said, but it's different from the slide, I believe, a little bit.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, okay.
You
So
know
what
what I mean?
we had, oops, we got this here, okay. So what you have is Aas Yádi, which would be they saw them. But then you can take this verb and you could, if you put this I on it, which this follows the same rules as the possessive or relational suffix, except it always stays low. And one of the things it's called an attributive suffix because it turns a verb into an attribute. So it often turns a verb into an adjective. And so like, let's just start a new slide so we could look at some examples, right? So let's say tlitzin, right? So you could say tlitzini shawat. So that would be a strong woman, right? So you could have tlichan, and then you could have tlichanikate, a strong smelling dog, right? So all those verbs have been converted now into adjectives. And so here you could have, we'll use huasatin, so it's more clear who's doing what. So you could say, I saw them. And I could say, huasatini ka, that person that I saw. So now the whole verb becomes like a descriptive of this noun. And so that's what you have. In this case, if you go back, dak, ya, shak, ak, the valley in the inland, ausatin ka aya, that person that he saw is there. So that's like the literal. And so as learners of Tlingit, we have this really interesting deepening understanding of what the Dauenhauers did. We have to continue to think about Richard and Nora Dauenhauer as they just created these incredible masterpieces. Like just thinking of like listening to a story or recording it and then writing down all the Tlingit and then translating every part of it. But if you read their translations, the more Tlingit you know, the more you realize those translations are written for English speakers. Because one of their intentions was to elevate Tlingit literature to say like this is as monumental as any literature anywhere in the world. But how are you going to convince people of that? You have to translate it and to make it sound really cool in English, which means you're going to have to move things around and stuff. And so as we go through this exercise and translate it, we start to see a little bit more. And just in terms of like, we got ayah 3 times in the sentence, right? It doesn't serve a whole lot of functions except for creating like some immediacy and saying it's right here. Dak ya shak ayah, it's right here in this ravine up in the interior. Ausatini ayah, that person he sees is there.
And sorry, just quick follow-up question if I can. I think last week you mentioned subordinate verbs.
Mm-hmm.
Would this not be a subordinate verb in this instance?
Yeah, because then here what you would have is oops, yeah, that's right. So you would have yak a, and then you would have irsatin, right? So these are 2 different verbs. Right here, in this case, we have it is good, and in this case, we have I see you or I saw you, right? But then there's an interesting thing that goes on here where we could say kesh irsatin, which would be I didn't see you or I don't see you. It could be either one. Like this is not a time-dependent verb. So what we can do is we take this verb, yak a, and then we take this version of the negative. We cut the tesh off of it, but that's the version we're going to take. And then we're going to put a suffix on there that does follow the tone thing. Now this says, oh, that's low, so now I've got to be high. And now this is the subordinate version of it is good to see you. So you usually get like it's blank, that blank, right? And so the first one is often a state thing. And so we were messing around with this too, because then you could say, you gotta be careful who you say this with, but you could also use this, right? It's terrible to see, which you could mean it if you want to. Well, you should be careful because I'll say the friend and I that we used to do this to each other, we don't like each other anymore. So maybe I don't recommend doing this with your friends because you might end up being enemies. Okay. But just to show like that's the pattern is you find, and it's more complicated than this because you could also do these things. You could do this with a future verb as well, right? So you could say, a, it will be good. Ye ik tini, it will be good to see you. So you can, and but that's getting more complicated. But you do see these things that work like this. And but for now, just think of this negative perfective. You can look up a negative perfective, and then you could throw this relational suffix on it. But it is a different suffix in this one.
So totally different construction, even though they look similar.
Well, a totally different meaning, and they follow the exact same rules, except for this one stays low. Yeah, Dene, what's up? Oh.
Khune, I wanted to ask when it comes to Kasakhan or Kasakhan, what exactly is the breakdown meaning of that to translate into cannibal?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So usually, one of the theories is that when you have Juan, you have, oh, how did someone put this? It was something like K'u and on, right? And so, but what Quan, first we'll start with this. So like if you say Ak Quan, now you're saying the ancestral people of Ak. So this is Wushkitan, Tlinedi, Yachtetan. And that's kind of it, right? Even if I live here and then my children live here and then their children and their children, we're not Ak Quan, right? I mean, if one of them marries an Ak Quan person or gets adopted, they can become Ak Quan. But it means like an ancestral person of a place. And so, for example, people in my hometown were trying to say, are we Skagwegians or are we Skagwayans? I was like, no, Day, X'éig. We don't need to start bringing all these other languages. You did enough bringing English here. Stop bringing Norwegian or whatever you're bringing here, right? Nothing against them. I'm Sami as well. But you could say...
They're indigenous.
Okay. Okay. So, X'éig, right? So this would be, for example, the people who live in Skagway, anybody who lives in Skagway. But if you say Ch'kut Kwan, these are the ancestral people of Chilkoot. So that's different, right? And this is a similar thing where people say, I'm Native Alaskan. Like, you can be Alaskan. Why don't you just be Alaskan? And and so, but here we have kusacha. So we have this verb, which is interesting, right? So if we go, like, let's just go look up the cha verb root in the dictionary and go see what we find for eating. So if we go down here, scroll up, we get cha. And here we get to eat, generally. And then we get sacha, to eat a variety of things in small amounts. Which I don't know why it switches to this. That's this version here, right? And then we have, this is cool, kachacha, to eat berries directly from the bush. So now you could probably tell the people you're berry picking with, if they're eating too much, you could say, I think you'd say, sheshkishchak. Don't eat them right off the bush. Yes, it's for the people. Okay. And then you have yachyasecha, which means to eat a whole bunch of things and to finish them up. So if we just go to look at the examples to understand this a little bit more, we're going to eat deer meat. They ate as much as they wanted. That's really interesting. That's also saying they ate until they were satisfied. Until they satisfied themselves, I guess. And now we get this. So this means one of two things. It means you're eating things in small amounts, or it means you're eating a whole bunch of different things. So I guess you could say kusacha means to eat a whole bunch of different people. Which it's like I'm not just eating the same person. I eat that person, and I'll eat that person, and then I'll try this one and see if they taste a little different. Like, I don't know. I'm not a cannibal, so I don't know how that stuff works.
Well, it talks about when we were living in the interior, so when we were so close to other tribes, like Athabascan.
Oh yeah, that could be it.
So ate a whole bunch of different
Right.
indigenous people.
I'll try a Taishoni, then I'll eat a
Exactly.
Dagish person, and then
Maybe a Tanana here, a Gwich'in here, a varied diet.
And then here it is. Ishi kishchak. There it is. Kishchak. Just as I predicted. Don't eat it off the berries. Don't eat off the bushes. But you know what? Go ahead. Whatever. Okay. So coming back to our analysis, it's such an interesting name because now we get kusacha, which would be eating different people, and then kwan, which means you're the ancestral people of this place. Like it's wild. But Quan was attached to non-Tlingit things too, right? So you have Washdan Quan, which is, anybody know where Washdan comes from?
Dísi.
Is it Washington or Boston?
It's Boston, because or else you'd need another syllable, right? You'd have Washington or something like that. So it's Boston. It comes from like the Boston people, right? The people of Boston. But then you know, I'm sure like there's the indigenous peoples of there, but like what? Wait, no, that's us, not them, right? And so, but I don't even know where Boston comes from. And then there's Guskiquan. Which we have to make sure we're saying, oops, I gotta get the I in there. We have to make sure we're saying Guskiquan. Because I have heard people stand up and introduce themselves. And there is a movement to go from Gleitqa to Guskiquan, which I'm fine with that. But someone stood up and they're introducing themselves and they said, Guskiquan Qinach. And we're like, whoa, you gotta keep this. Because if you lose this, then you're saying the people at the base of the vagina is basically what you're saying. So you have to keep this in there. Guskiquan, people at the base of the clouds, which is a cool name. So Qasaqaquan would be the people from like it's a fun thing to kind of analyze because it seems like in the Tlingit perspective, now you'll never be the same because now you're always an ancestral person of eating people.
Oh, wow. Goodness, cheese.
Your Quan always follows your matrilineal, just like your clan?
It does, and it also follows where your name is from. So if you're from, let's say you were born and raised in Yakutat, and you're just always identified as being from Yakutat, and you find out your name comes from Latuya Bay, that's where you're from. Or, you know, you find out your name comes from Huna, that's where you're from. But it's not always that because we also have shared names all over the place. Okay, good questions.
Kune, while we're on the topic, I'm just curious, is there any development on what the name for Canadian? Because it has been Genjiquan or something like that, if I remember right.
Yeah, so then, well, there's some discussions going on. There's a bunch of these discussions going on, and there's some stuff that we got to figure out, right? So like, let's look at some examples, right? So Chanwan, Ginjituan, Tujqa, and Gleitqa, right? So there's probably, just like worldwide, well, especially all throughout, well, not all throughout, but in many parts of America, there are increased sensitivities in terms of what do you call people. And those things change all the time. And there's a lot of power dynamics, there's a lot of social dynamics involved. And there's plenty of instances where it's like, yes, we can call ourselves this, but if you call us that, it's on, right? And there's lots of groups that have all these different terms, and they're usually really negative terms, and then the group has sort of reclaimed them. So there are some of these things that are going on. And so like, one of the things that's kind of at the heart of this is soy sauce. So what are the two names that are commonly used for soy sauce? Does anybody know? Well, show you is what we're using nowadays. Historically.
Hikaman?
Yeah, so you have Chanwan, Kayaaní. Anybody know the other one?
Does one of them have to do with Kushta? Like Kushta Kyuku maybe or something like that?
No way. So neither of these are great names for foods, especially if you, and so we got some feedback from someone who speaks Japanese and studied in Japan and stuff, and they said, these names are actually pretty bad, and you wouldn't want people using these names to talk about your food. So one of the things, if we go to this, so when you have this one, right, so here's another one. Here's one that's not terribly bad. This is another name for a student. And let me show you how it breaks down. Schoolman. And then this is the name for, I might have the spelling wrong on some of these. Watchman. That's the name for a police officer. Where do you think that comes from?
Flatfoot, or no?
Well, I mean, this is a Lingish word. It's English put into Tlingit. What does watchman sound like? If schoonwan, so if one comes from man,
Watchman.
Watchman.
right? So where do you think chanwan comes from? So now we have a problem. Because this is not something that you'd really want people to go around saying in English anymore, right? This is something, especially if you study the United States and anti-Chinese policies and tendencies and stuff. So then one of the goals is probably to say, well, we should probably just stop saying Chanwan, right? But these are interesting things because ancestors said these things. And then we're going to get into these conversations, just like in English, right? We're like, well, my grandpa said this, but yeah, your grandpa had some problems, right? So there's a whole bunch of things, and there's a whole bunch of things in English, right? Like someone's telling me a story, and then they have this word for, I'm not gonna say the word, but they said the word, and they must have seen my face drop, and they said, well, it's a rock where the top of it's poking out of the ground. What the hell am I supposed to call it? And I said, a rock with the top poking out of the ground. I don't know. You cannot call it that other thing though. So, but Ginjichuan. So what's that? What's the origin of this one?
Is it George Man?
Yeah, King George. So that's Ginjichuan, right? And so that's where Canadian comes from. And then we get into, if we get into Táax'aa, that's, and Táax'aa. So these are things to also put under consideration as languages evolve and as people's vocabularies develop, like these things. But these things, they're different because you could say black, like you could say that in reference to people, but sometimes you can, and sometimes, for some it's not, and there's a difference between saying like a black person and the blacks, right? Like and these are getting into some political gray areas too. But one of the things was like looking at, there's a proposal, Huang, to have this be the replacement for Táax'aa. And it comes from but also you're trying to lump an entire continent and folks who have been brought over here through slave trade and other things. And so these are conversations I think that are good to have as we sort of continue to look at the language, how we can sort of adjust things, and then consulting with people from these populations as well, and just realizing even within populations, you're gonna have a whole bunch of differing opinions. Similar, there was a dialogue online, because there's a book called Firecracker Boys, which is a good book. And in the subtitle, it says the word Eskimo. And so we were sharing, we're just recommending the title, and someone said something about the subtitle. And I said, well, that's not a slur if you're from there. And it's not always a slur if I don't know, because it's on the logo for the AFN, last I checked, unless they've updated their logo, the Alaska Federation of Natives. But so we have taken to calling this shuyuhini, adopting the Japanese word shoyu, which is the word for soy sauce. And I'll just say one last comment on this. There's been this online debate that's tearing us apart
Oh my goodness.
on whether we should be using Kiko Man or what's the other one? There's another soy sauce. Yes, La Choy, right? So there's La Choy Kwan and there's Kiko Man Kwan. And so they say you gotta pick a side. Which one you gonna take? And so I just used the internet and I looked up what's the most popular soy sauce in Japan. And that's the one I use. I don't even know what it's called. So now I'm out of that debate. Okay.
Aloha.
I did use Aloha. I was using Aloha for a long time. And someone pointed out there's a lot of chemicals in it.
The Hadas got me on it.
Hmm?
The Haida got me on it.
Oh, you can. You can. Okay.
So I got a quick question. What's the connection from Kayaaní Kwan? I'm not missing I'm missing the connection on why that's a possible alternative.
The suggestion came from Hitli Ish, and you'd probably have to ask him for the specifics. But I think in one of the cultures, the many cultures that's over there, that's how they refer to themselves, as the people of the stars. And so it was just sort of directly translated into Tlingit. As a,
That suggestion was given to him by someone else.
okay. Adusa, what do you want to say?
Cecilia Westman.
Oh, sheesh. Okay. Yes, Cecilia Westman. So there, and then you have someone who's of the people, right? And so these are all conversations that are going on. And we have, and in other cases, there's like a word for Filipino in Tlingit, and it's a Tlingit word, as far as I know. And so sometimes you analyze these things and you say, well, where does the word come from? And then there's the word, and this is one that is talked about still, and so I was in a local restaurant and I was telling some story and I said, and then this glade shawat, and then this lady walks by and she goes, I'm a glade shawat. And I was like, you okay, right? So, but I wasn't using it in a negative way, but I was bringing up a power dynamic of a white lady who's treating me different. And, there are sometimes dynamics that we talk about with that. Okay, we're way off the rails, but good stuff still.
I find it really interesting because when we were studying public health, and obviously you have to do demographics and a lot of data analysis, the trend up until 2017, 2019 was to go from Caucasian to white people and say white people. And there's many scholars of color who are advocating for instead of African American to go to Black people.
Right.
For it. And so I find it interesting that in our language now we're seeing kind of the opposite push of that.
Yeah, and so it's interesting too to think about that, and then to think like a Black person might not be the most offensive one. Like Chinaman, I think that one's got to go, right? And instead, but then you could say, well, what do we call people? Well, it's like, well, what do they call themselves? And then what's the context of the conversation? Yeah, good stuff. And Gunshish to all the people who are out there initiating these conversations. A related one probably has to do with this too. Ka, this is a gendered part of Tlingit, is ka there. So ka has several different meanings. So there's one that does mean person, and you would spell it like this, and it would have persons or someone's. There is a possessive or relational pronoun that's related to it, right? So this one is non-gendered. So if you say, for example, Ka'tla, a person's mother or people's mothers, or just generally mothers. So you could say Ka'tla Yagi, Mother's Day, right? But there's a second one, and then they are completely identical, and that means a man. And then in this case, this one up here is a relational pronoun, and this one right here is an adjective. And as an adjective, it means male. Ka'zisku. But you don't have the same thing here. So you have ka as a person, but then you have shawat as a woman, but then to say, how would you say female? Anybody know? Right? We would wonder, does it follow the same pattern? It does not. Sheech. So you would say, and so this is female. So same thing. So you'd have kadzisk, guk, should it. Sheech zisk, gosh, like. But if the season's open, go for it. So those are interesting things as well, because we talk about Tlingit being a fairly non-binary language, right? So you have we're all right? Du, the third person subject and a verb, third person object and a verb, that's totally ungendered. But these ones are. And so are the kinship terms. Not all of them, but we have, and we're going to engage in some more of these conversations as well. And much like we talked about with the last one, you have to involve the people who are from the communities. So we're going to have a conversation in the near future about our LGBTQ plus communities to say we probably need to come up with some terms. We probably need to figure out some things. We do have families that have two mothers and families that have two fathers. And we've got to figure out what's the kinship term there, because it's more than ach'at, right? Because but it's also, in some cases, that's your clan opposite too. So we've been kind of looking at some things like, so here's a kinship term. If you said ach, here's two, ach yitsh, or I guess it goes this way. What are those? Anybody know what those are? So this one comes from, and this one comes from. What's achit?
My son,
And what's shet?
wife,
Yes. So what do you think achit shet would be?
my son's wife.
Yes. Or, and then here. So those terms do exist. So then we're trying to figure out, can we stack some terms as well? But this is something, we got to have some more people in the room to talk about some of this stuff as well. And then we end up with some, what is the word here? We didn't get back to our story. We will next week. We'll finish it. I promise. We'll finish it.
Isn't it Sha when we add things to the end, like Yamasha or?
It's women of.
Sha?
So, okay, yeah, okay, that's another great example. So we have a bunch of, I don't know if all of them do this, but for example,
What's the Dr. Tom one?
Kayaaní. So here you have, this is not, there's no gender in this. So you have dak, inland, you have, oops, I put the, you have tleo, sand, you have ut, a thing, and you have the relational suffix, right? And that's how you get Kayaaní. But you can also have dak, tleo, Shah. So now you've kept the Tleo, and now you say Shah. Now you have women of the Daklawedi. Chukanedi, Chukan Shah, Shukach Adi, Shukach Shah. And then some of them, Yanwa Shah is built into that clan name. And so Yanwa Shah is gender specific. And so these are some things to just sort of think about and consider in terms of how does the language currently take care of these things, and what's the wishes of the group as well. And those wishes, these are sensitive things because not everyone's going to want the same thing. And as we sort of have transitioned as far as the materials that I make to using genderless pronouns to say it's more accurate to what Tlingit is doing, there are people who have a problem with it, and they let me know. And some of them, they let me know repeatedly.
Shah, the Sable ladies or the turn women.
Oh, Shah. Yeah, the turn ladies. Yeah, what? Yeah. Which is interesting because that's not related to the clan name at all, which is Táax'aa. Táax'aa hit ta. Or Táax, should be. Yeah, okay. Well, it was a good discussion though. It's like good stuff that we gotta, as the thing I'll say about this is Tlingit is a living, breathing language, which means it's going to change all the time. And that's totally fine. And there's all kinds of changes that we talk about. And some of these changes are things like this they do have to do with power and privilege and belonging. But then sometimes we're just looking at some other things, right? Like for example, if I say, hot, ye, ot, right? Or that should be ut. And then this, if I put yak a in front of it, because we'd say klesh, hot, ye, ot. Now it goes long and low. Yak a, hot, ye, d. So what I want to point out with this, here's something that I think is changing. This should be ye ut. This should be ye ot. And this should be yak a hot ye ati. So this second Y, keep it in your brain. Because what I hear a lot of people say is this is where it's trending. Yak a hot ye ati. Is that this sound gets lost and that needs to be there. So this is how it should sound. Yak a hot ye ati. Ye, so it's got a little waver. Ye, as opposed to yak a hot ye ati. But it's a very subtle difference. Ye, 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 ye. So sometimes when we talk about how the language is changing, we'll say, okay, this cannot change. We cannot let it go this way. And this is not like slang. This is like something that we're losing that we should hold on to. Things that are slang is when people say this. What do they mean when they say this? What do you think they mean?
Tsuye Kwasatim.
So yeah, plus it, and then it cut the whole verb off. And then I pick myself up off the floor after I see it. But it's people taking ownership of the language, and so it's a negotiation. And every language goes through this, like you'll see the generation, they're just roading English, right? And so you have people who are saying that, right?
Isn't Wasaway kind of slang too?
It is a little bit, but yeah. And Ziyagan certainly is. Because 50 years ago, people never said that to say goodbye. I don't think. It just specifically meant sometime in the near future. And we got to go. Ziyagan keshyak khatkakwati. I'm not going to be here because I'm going to go home. Keep thinking of questions. Good stuff.
Sheesh.
Let's cheese. Let's cheese.
Yay.
Cheese.
Jeez,
Good cheese.